Welcome to part 2 of the ISU David Foster Wallace Conference Review episode. This is Dave Laird, and in this episode you are going to be hearing interviews with Melissa Holton, Jane Carman, Emily Spalding and Josh Katz, Tony McMahon, Ryan Marnane, and then Rob Short and Chris Ayers. We also want to let you guys know that our caption contest is going to close at the end of the day on August 31st. So you have until then to either write your caption on Twitter under the comment section of that photo, on Facebook, or on Instagram. Enjoy the episode. All right. The final day of the conference. I'm here with Melissa Holton. Melissa, thanks for joining The Great Concavity.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I had the great privilege of getting to moderate your panel, and you gave an amazing paper on Infinite Jest and the Gothic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It was so fun to be able to talk about that. Could you give us kind of a rundown of your paper?
Sure, I'll try.
Yeah.
When I was reading Infinite Jest, I was struck by certain image patterns and things like that just felt very Gothic to me. And so I looked at things like liminality and abjection and imagery like skulls and heads, the face and the floor, the black wing, things like that. And then in terms of what it's telling us about what the characters are doing, but it intersects really well with a lot of what contemporary Gothic does, which is this provoking of unease, thinking that something is familiar and realizing that it's actually very, very strange.
Yeah.
So, Wallace does that incredibly well.
He does, doesn't he?
Yeah. So that's kind of the basic idea.
Oh, yeah, and I forgot, I should probably mention that you're a professor of literature and you specialize in the Gothic in your teaching, and you're out of Austin, Texas.
I teach at Austin Community College.
Yeah.
I've taught there for many, many years, and now I'm full-time, and I teach an honors class in Gothic literature.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
What are some texts that you use a fair bit
that
tend to recur?
Probably the ones you would think of.
Yeah.
There's Dracula, Frankenstein. We do Macbeth. We do a short story by Neil Gaiman. We do some Sylvia Plath. We do this really weird early American guy, Charles Brockton Brown.
Okay.
Who wrote this crazy story that involves somnambulism, ventriloquism, and spontaneous combustion.
Oh, wow. Sounds like a Wallace short story
does,
from
doesn't
Oblivion
it?
or something.
It's kind of interesting, some of the parallels.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
no kidding.
it's really fun. It was the class I always wanted to take, and never got offered when I was in school, and so I just decided, what the hell, I'll teach it.
That's the best way to do it.
Yeah,
That's the best way to learn it, is to teach it, right?
Yeah.
I took a Gothic lit class in my undergrad, 10 years ago.
Great.
And,
what did you read in there?
We read Dracula. We read, I think, War of the Worlds.
Oh, nice.
A couple H.G. Wells pieces. Island of Dr. Moreau.
Oh, yeah.
Vivisection was a big theme, I remember.
Sure.
Yeah. And I wrote a paper on Dracula called The Gospel According to Bram Stoker.
Nice.
And I got the best mark in my entire undergrad on it. And
Wow.
I was like, if I ever get to take a class with this prof again, I think I'll do okay. Like, she, for some reason, just really liked it. But we had very different approaches to this stuff. But it ended up working out kind of well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So how's the conference been for you? What's your experience been like? It's your first Wallace conference,
Yeah,
right?
it's my first Wallace conference. It's overwhelming in the best way. In the absolute best way. Everybody here is so friendly, and I was talking about it with my husband, who's here with me, and we were saying how amazing it is to sit in a room of incredibly smart people who are all so kind and seemingly without any sort of agenda of one-upsmanship or anything.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
really about a dialogue, and I love it, and I love getting to geek out and go do things like take picture of myself in front of Wallace's office door and stuff like that. It's
what
fun.
number was it? 420 something?
420C.
It was 420.
Yeah.
I mean, that has a pretty thematic Bob Hope style reference in Infinite Jest with how...
it wasn't lost on him. It wasn't.
He probably intentionally requested that office.
Probably.
Yeah, I'll go take a picture in front of that. Now that I know that's the right one.
Yeah.
And it's now in the medieval studies department, right?
It is. Yeah. But I was thinking, this is the door where he posted about being gone on the book tour for Infinite Jest and all of that. So, really cool just to be in the space. humanizes him, and
Yeah.
it just, it's just been so lovely to talk with people about all this.
Yeah, and there was the great panel with Charlie Harris and a few other profs from Illinois State University who were
very
colleagues,
moving.
and they had really cool artifacts like the Dave Eggers manuscript for Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius, and Wallace had some comments in it, and I thought that was great.
The recipe for a well-written blurb on the back.
Yeah, that's right. Not an actual blurb, but like here's how to do it.
The ingredients he would need to do to produce one. It's
Which I don't remember
love
Wallace
that.
doing a blurb on that book in the printed copies of it.
Thought he did.
Oh, did he? It's
I'm
been
not-
like a decade since I read
It's been a while
Heartbreaking Work,
since,
but yeah. Well, that's very cool. So it's been pretty positive vibes.
Totally.
All around.
Completely.
Yeah, I agree.
And I love all the cool artistic interpretation things, like Corey's Baldoff's presentation yesterday really resonated for me, and Tony McMahon's on the adaptations.
Yeah, that was
and
great
just
today, wasn't
really
it?
cool stuff. I mean, all the scholarship is, kind of this straightforward academic scholarship.
Yeah.
How straightforward is it really? But it's all really interesting, but you realize how immersive the world is of Wallace when you see the artistic
expressions
or
outpourings. Yeah, it's really amazing to see how people from different disciplines take the same source material and do radically different things with it.
Absolutely.
And that's a really refreshing, cool community to be a part of.
It is. It is. It feels like we're all on the same team.
Yes.
Even if we're
totally
wearing different colored jerseys or whatever.
In your case, all black.
All black.
For the Gothic.
Yes.
We were emailing before the conference and figured out that we were going to be in the airport around the same time, and you were like, I'm the one wearing all black, because I'm presenting on the Gothic, so I thought that was great.
It just sort of worked out that way.
Yeah. But then you had like a luggage snafu, and you had to go buy some clothes at midnight, and it sounds like a lot of people had really horrific travel experiences getting here.
Maybe that's a part of the bonding that goes on.
I think so, and I think it kind of simulates that like Wallacean consumer hell public scenario, like all the stuff about the grocery store and the Kenyon speech could
I was
very
thinking of
easily
that
be
at
applied to
midnight in line at
airports
Walmart, actually.
Yeah. No kidding.
How could you not?
Yeah. Going back to your presentation and your paper, there was you had some multimedia, which was great. It's nice to have some.
Thanks.
And there was one slide that I just loved, the one where you did like a word count of like words associated with abjection.
Yeah,
like
all the
Julia
body
Costello.
fluids.
So like how many times does blood appear? Vomit, shit,
right.
All these, and you had mucus.
Pus.
And what was the final count for all of those abject words?
551.
551 gross words.
But it seemed to make a funny impact in the middle of the paper, so that was good.
Yeah, that was a great moment. That's awesome. Do you have any plans going forward to do anything else with Wallace, like paper writing wise or teaching wise?
Yes, absolutely. I'm very new to Wallace, actually, just about a year in.
Cool.
With him.
Well, welcome to the team.
Thank you. I feel very late to the party, but I'm so glad I showed up. Going forward, one thing I'd like to look at, and I have to see, who's already done work on this, because I want to fit into that conversation, but it would be about his pedagogical materials, because, even more than because I teach Comp 1 and Comp 2 so much, there's something that really resonated when I was looking at his teaching materials in the archive, just like, okay, this is a person I know, on some level. And as a teacher, I think there's more to be done there, And then there's just a lot of other stuff actually with the Gothic that I'd like to do with Wallace. There's so much that I didn't have a chance
Oblivion
to.
seems like just a horror landscape. So there's probably a lot.
I think there's a lot, and the discussion is starting to come out in kind of postmodern meets Gothic studies. There have been a few kind of landmark books that have been coming out in the last few years, so it's a field that's expanding, just like Wallace studies.
Right.
Is,
Have you heard of a scholar from Canada called Jodi Castrocano?
No.
By chance?
No.
Okay, she's the teacher I had for that Gothic class, and she's published some stuff on Gothic.
Cool.
So
I'll have to look her up.
Yeah, she's really interesting.
Very cool.
That's great. So exciting new like areas of scholarship are opening up in this Wallace field.
Yeah,
and the Gothic seems like a really exciting one.
I think it'll be fun.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to doing
Totally,
more
you can
with
lead
it.
the charge.
Yeah.
You'll be the guru, the resident guru.
I don't know about that. I don't want to sit on top of a towel dispenser.
Yeah, and levitate. Oh, man. Have you read Brief Interviews with Hideous Men yet?
Yeah.
The one story about the bathroom attendant.
Oh,
and the sounds, like the objection stuff,
oh
and
my
that
God,
would be an amazing paper.
Completely. There's a lot to do there. Yeah.
I mean, the whole book, but especially like.
But that one in particular.
Oh,
for
man.
sure. Yeah. It's so. Yeah.
Need we say more,
No.
listeners?
I think they know.
Highlight of the conference. If you had to pin it down to a moment, is that possible?
Oh gosh, Marshall Boswell's keynote was pretty stellar.
It was killer.
So many different papers that I loved, and I can't pick one.
Yeah.
My feeling of relief after my paper was done.
I was gonna say that's a pretty up there moment for me too.
Yeah.
Not yours, but mine.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh God, she's done.
But we were back to back, so at least I got it over pretty fast.
Oh, and I loved your paper on Mario.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we had a nice discussion about Mario prior to. And that was,
Mario's. He's. You gotta love Mario.
Yeah, my supervisor referred to my Mario chapter as the Super Mario chapter because my reading of Mario in the theological context is pretty elevated, right? So that was kind of a funny like running joke that we had. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for letting us know about your paper and sharing your experience at the conference. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of Great Concavity, so this is like really cool.
Yeah, right on. Well, we appreciate all your stuff on Twitter and the ways that you've engaged with us, and it's been awesome. Where can people find you on Twitter and find more of your work and stuff?
I am at MacCalisa17, Macalisa, because in my real world I'm known as Lisa, but Melissa is the official name. But and then I'm just Melissa Holton on Facebook. So
and Lisa Holton on Twitter, is that?
Yeah.
Cool.
And
right on.
And I have DFW pictures up in both of those spots, so you can find me.
All right. Easy signifiers.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks. All right, I'm here now with Jane Carman. Jane, you have been the like lifeblood of this conference for the last 3 years, the organizer and just like an amazing pillar of the Wallace community. Thank you so much for all the work you've done with this conference and the ways that you've just engaged us and welcomed us, and we just appreciate it so much. So
thanks for being part of it.
Yeah. Thanks for hosting us, for having us.
Well,
we love it.
Yeah. Actually, this year Ryan Edel took it over.
Yeah. Main organizer, but you were in the wings as a support. Yeah. But so you've been involved the last 2 years for 1 and 2 as the main organizer those years. Yeah. So what's your experience been like doing this conference? How did you come into it? What's it meant to you?
Yeah, well, originally when I started the conference, there was a lot of talk around town, or rumblings around town, that nobody cared about David, and nobody honored the memory of David. And as a master's student and a PhD student here, when I was a student here, which was a ways back, I hadn't read one Wallace book in a class.
Yeah.
So I thought that was sad. And then we have somebody like David that we can celebrate, and nobody was celebrating, and I thought it would be nice to have a conference, and one where he was so important to him. He spent so much time here, and a lot of things happened for him here.
Yeah.
So I decided to start a conference, and it was really kind of late in the game that year to start the conference. I didn't really have any interns, so I was kind of on my own.
Oh, wow.
And I had to figure out how to make it, to make it work. And so I budgeted the money for the Marriott and the registration fees, and figured out how much we would have to charge for tickets, and we'd have to have X amount of people. And I was overwhelmed. I think we were aiming for 35, and we ended up having, with volunteers, 125 or 30. So
that's pretty great.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you did a PhD here at ISU?
I did.
Were you here around the same time Wallace was here at all?
I was not.
Did you no overlap there?
Overlap.
Yeah. And you're in publishing. You write yourself as well. I'm seeing your books around. I'm seeing your names in a lot of these copyright pages. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. I'm a creative writer, and that's why I got my master's and my PhD here, and I was geographically bound to here, which ended up being a really good thing for me because this program was kind of perfect.
Yeah.
So when I first come here, Kurt White, who was a good friend of David's, and David had a lot of influence on Kurt. I was writing realism when I got here. And I had a class with Kurt, and he said, bring in something that inspires you. And I brought in something that inspired me. And he looked at it, and he looked down, and he shook his head, and he said, if you want to write like that. And so it like crushed my soul. At the same time, it let me know that there were other things to do. And then so becoming involved with all these writers that are writing experimental stuff, I found that a lot of really good writers aren't getting published. They're just like banging their heads on the wall because they have something that's maybe way too far out there for other people, or too difficult, or or you're not getting academic jobs unless you have some books. So that's what brought me to the publishing.
But there's that double bind of you can't get an academic job unless you have academic publications, but you can't really get academic publications unless you have an academic or it's harder to.
Correct.
So it's a bit of a tough situation, right? Like, So you kind of opened up an avenue for smaller writers to voice some really cool work.
We're doing some really great first books that we have coming up in the next year and a half. So
awesome.
Pretty excited about those, and there are people that I think would have a hard time with. A difficult time with even an experimental publisher, and an impossible time with mainstream publishers.
Yeah, no kidding. And the name of the publication company is?
It's LitFest Press.
LitFest Press.
And which is a bounce off of Festival of Language. I started that in 2009 as a reading, as an offsite event at AWP.
Cool, that's great. So have you done any academic stuff with Wallace's work, or did you... you were presenting this morning, Proofread or Die was the panel name.
Yes.
I wasn't there, unfortunately. I went to some other ones. Could you tell us about what happened at the panel?
Yeah, it's, the Proofread or Die is an anthology that Charlie Harris put together.
Yeah.
And it's writings by Wallace's colleagues or students from the time when he was here at ISU. It's a pretty good bunch of work, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I just
anthology.
picked that up. I'm excited to look at it.
So that was the main thing behind the panel.
Yeah.
Charlie thought we'd be good to have a panel here, and I proposed one for AWP, so we'll see.
Oh yeah.
They don't like very many people.
So was it you and Charlie's just kind of roundtable discussion? Was that the?
No, it was Charlie. Charlie came to me and said, "Hey, I've got this idea and this thing, and are you interested?" And I said yes, and
awesome.
I said, "But try some bigger publishers, because it'd be nice to have more PR for it than I can do." And he tried some bigger publishers, and not at all interested.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. For the panel presentation this morning, were papers read, or was it a discussion format?
Papers were mostly read, and a little bit of discussion. Ben Slotky was there, Brian Monday was there, myself, and Charlie Harris.
Awesome. Were you the moderator for it? Did I see that correctly on the schedule?
No, I read.
Oh, you read? Yeah. How'd it go? How was the Q&A? Was there some?
It's pretty good.
Some fun questions.
People are always most curious about how Wallace influences somebody, or in all the panels here, I think everybody wants to know how Wallace influences somebody. It's a difficult question, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty clear that everyone who comes to this conference has been influenced by his writing in really profound personal ways.
Right.
And I think that's one of the unique things about his work. That, I mean, you can talk about DeLillo and McCarthy and these other contemporary American writers, but do they grab your heart in the same way that Wallace's writing does? I mean, I think they do and can, but there seems to be something unique about Wallace's writing that just really connects maybe a bit deeper. I mean, that's probably true for me, as much as I love those other writers, but...
Yeah, I think so, because he has something for everybody, right? He has the nonfiction, and he's got the fiction, and he's got the long fiction, and he's got the short fiction, so regardless of what you like, there's something there for you. Yeah,
there's a diverse portfolio to draw from. Yeah, that's really cool. And it's fun to see a really wide range of presentations here at this conference about his journalism and about his short fiction and his long fiction and all the paratextual stuff, which your panel was. So there's so much really interesting stuff to draw from, which is cool.
Yes, it
keeps it fun and exciting. So going forward into thinking about future Wallace conferences here, how do you see your participation, involvement with that? And
I hope it stays the same. I like to be involved, but since I'm 2 hours away, I like that I'm the person that they email with questions. Ryan's going to do it again next year, and then that's his last year here. So
right.
So I'm a little concerned.
Yeah.
But I will
like
keep
who's
applying
going to take
for
up the
jobs
mantle?
here. So
Yeah.
that would let me be more part of it.
Yeah. Have you made it out to any other Wallace conferences in different places?
I have not.
Okay.
I hear they're very far away.
Yeah, they can be.
Yeah.
I went to one in Paris a couple of years ago because I was living in that area at the time, so it's pretty easy to get there. But there's one in Australia coming up in Melbourne next year. Nick Maniatis and some other friends down there putting that together, Tony McMahon. So that should be interesting to hear the reports from.
I would love to go. I don't fly, so it'd be a long
it's the
drive
worst.
and boat ride.
Yeah. Yes, that would be for sure. Awesome. Any last thoughts or highlights from the conference? We were just saying that you're so relieved that it's over. Maybe that's the highlight.
No, the people at the conference are the highlight of the conference. Any writers conference who I would go to, and the people would be this wonderful. I think it would be one of my favorite conferences. The people are just absolutely amazing. And if somebody stumbles, nobody gives them a hard time, and I don't hear questions from the audience that are wicked in any way. Sometimes you hear that at other conferences.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I was just talking to Melissa Holton about this. It's her first Wallace conference, and I asked her about her experience, and she just gushed about how beautiful the community is and how generous people are with each other, and it feels like we're on a team.
Yeah,
and it seems like that's maybe a unique scholarly community, that there's not a lot of competition,
Right, yeah.
On the surface. So it's great to be a part of, and thank you so much again for all your amazing hard work with this conference. We continually appreciate it every year.
Well, great. Thanks for being part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Okay, this is the last day of the conference, and I'm here with
Emily Spalding.
Josh Katz.
And you guys are from where?
Richmond, Virginia.
Both from Richmond, Virginia. And what's your connection? How do you know each other?
I guess I was your English teacher for one semester, but more importantly, we just finished a screenplay adaptation of Infinite Jest.
Yeah, and that's why we're talking, essentially. Is this you guys' first time at a Wallace conference?
It's actually our second time.
Oh,
we were
yeah?
here last year. I presented last year, and Josh was cheering me on, and we were doing a lot of research as well.
Awesome. I guess we must not have met last year.
No, we must
I don't
have
remember
missed each
meeting
other.
you guys.
The conference space felt a little impersonal. It would have been easy to
It
get
did.
lost there.
It was very grandiose last year, and this year was at ISU in the hallways, in the classrooms, and so it had a much more of like a we're in school kind of a feel rather than like we're in a fancy ballroom.
Yeah.
Kind of a feel. Did you guys prefer that this year, or what's your preference, do you think?
I certainly respected the pomp of last year, and I understand why we moved, but part of me, I'm going to crib from Chris Ayers here, when he said that he felt stressed out being in the classroom because he thought that continually he was going to be late for class, and I felt that way as well.
That's a good way to put it. I like it.
I mean, I thought it was a little bit more, just personal this year. Being in the school, it felt a little bit more, I guess, sort of true to the fashion of the conference. But last year it was fine. I was staying at that hotel, so I got to sort of run upstairs when I was really nervous and about to present, which was good. But this sort of forced me, I guess, to sort of just deal with it there.
Yeah, or throw up on campus.
Yeah,
which we got
it was fine, which is very fitting, given that Wallace, infamously threw up in the bushes before his college interview. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Is that in the biography?
I want to say, now I'm going to forget where it's from. I remember my teacher telling me this story. It might have been in the DT Max one. Yeah. I think it must have been.
Yeah, cool. Charlie Harris said to me on the first day that like this space is really interesting to do the conference because Dave's DNA is all over this place. And I was like,
that's a weird way to phrase it.
Yeah, okay. That puts things in a new light.
What would Wallace have been
black
doing
light?
walking? I was going to say walking the halls with a black light. That should be the name of an essay of his, I suppose.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Cool. So tell me about your Infinite Jest screenplay.
How far back you want us to go?
I don't know. Like in 8 minutes or less. Tell us about what it is, your process, what you plan to do with it or hope to do with it.
The process felt fairly traditional as far as these things go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to account for the fact that we were a high school teacher and a high school student writing a screenplay together,
Mm-hmm.
and there's something about that that's like deeply non-traditional.
Yeah.
And yet
It's very collaborative.
Yeah, and we tried to treat it as such. Our goal in writing it on a technical level, and we can get in later what we were trying to achieve thematically, but we wanted to approach this the same way that you would approach a traditional Hollywood script. If Infinite Jest in its totality is trying to get the nature of entertainment and how we respond to it and what it does, we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to play with an actual form of entertainment itself in mutating it? So let's take this book and turn it into a traditional Hollywood film. It's never going to be traditional, but it can fit that format.
Yeah.
So it can be 3 acts. We held ourselves to, no matter what, this thing is going to be no shorter than 90 pages and no longer than 120 pages, because that's most screenplay lengths.
Okay, so that would translate to about 2 hours on
Exactly.
of screen time? Okay.
So we're not thinking miniseries at all.
Yeah.
That's not to say that we don't like the idea of it being a miniseries, but rather the exercise felt a little bit more provocative if we're looking at it as a 2-hour movie. Because again, maximum scalability, it'll play X number of times a day, right?
Yeah.
We, at a certain point, toyed with the idea of writing it in the industry standard amount of time if you're in the WGA, which is about 9 weeks. But given the fact that, again, high school teacher and student, I had other classes I had to deal with.
Yeah.
Emily had to, apply to college.
Just figure my life
Which,
out
and
right
you also
there.
just got into where? Was it Princeton?
I will be a proud member, or I am a proud member of the class of 2020, Princeton Tigers.
Yeah.
So
Congratulations.
thank you very much.
Very,
I am so
very
excited.
baller. So how did you guys decide, if you're writing a 2-hour screenplay, what do you cut from Infinite Jest? That seems like an insane project, an insanely challenging project. How do we pare this thing down into 2 hours?
Yeah.
So how did that go?
I mean, I think it was important for us right from the get-go. We weren't doing, Infinite Jest, the movie, where it was going to be every single character and little thing, which was very difficult to sort of, I think, deal with at first, because there's so many great things about the book that really help the reader get through it, and it'll be something that is nothing related to the plot, but you'll take a particular liking towards. But it was important to us to sort of hone in on some very specific themes and sort of realize what aspects of Wallace and Infinite Jest we wanted to honor and bring in and include in this, and what we would maybe sort of need to incorporate, if not maybe explicitly in the character as it appears in the novel, but maybe have 10 ETA players represented in one ETA player. And it was actually quite, not that any of this process was easy, but it was a little simpler than maybe at least I thought it would be to sort of incorporate all of those different themes and messages and characters into maybe just 1 or 2.
Okay.
Well, on a pragmatic level, once we decided that this needs to be short and it can't go past a certain length, it just becomes a question of being ruthless. Okay, we like Katie Gompert, her stuff's heartbreaking, but unfortunately she's not going to make it into that.
She's not major enough to...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't represent... It's not that she doesn't represent the themes that we were dealing with, but can we do it in a bigger character? So we took this massive cast and we oriented it around 2, Gately and Hal.
Yeah.
We felt the strongest affinity. Emily, hearing her talk about Hal, I can't think of a better person to deal with that inner life of the teenager period.
Totally.
And then likewise with Gately, but not for the reasons, I think, of the addict and the halfway house with you, but in the way that I maybe possibly related to Hal just because of his age. But there were very specific reasons why you gravitated towards Gately. And
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm 30. I started writing this when I was 28, and for me, with Gately, there's very much this sense of a guy who's growing up and trying to. He's not a teenager anymore. He doesn't have the kind of opportunities that Hal has, and he's trying to figure out how to be decent. And there's something that's every day for me. In my very small scale, non-drug addicted sense, I go out into the world and I worry about, all right, is what I'm doing representative of the kind of decency that I want to convey? And that, to me, that's Gately. And there's something I think is very heroic about that. So once we got through that matter of really pretty simple character identification, we just felt, okay, we can do this. Because plot-wise, Wallace gives you enough. I mean, you're not wanting for incident in either case. It's just a question of what do we have to do? How do we torture this narrative to make it fit something that, I don't know, you can digest in 2 hours?
Sure.
If that's possible.
But then still honor the spirit of this great book.
Yeah.
And why people gravitated towards so much and why it's such a unique thing in the literary canon.
Yeah. Is Mario in it at all?
He is.
Oh,
and,
good.
And
I'm so relieved.
I really loved getting to write Mario's dialogue because I think it's so sweet how it's written in the book. And a lot of it I was able to keep his little, hey boo boo, hey Hal kind of thing in there,
It's
which
okay,
was nice.
It's okay.
Right,
Did
and
you get
then
that
in writing,
fans?
and in writing these horrible things that were happening on the campus, to then have Mario's little part where he was just saying nothing but sweet things was kind of a nice relief for me, at least.
Yeah.
I found in writing. But.
Yeah, he's a nice respite from like all the really gnarly stuff.
Yeah. Well, he's one of those details that's kind of perfect because on one level he is a respite. He gives us a break from some of the horrors that are happening, and yet he is like fundamentally that he's such an odd character in a lot of other ways that it felt like a nice balance between something that's commercial, we get a break, and something that's still deeply kind of odd and human and strange and yearning. Like that all came together in that one character. So finding people like that, finding moments like that helped us preserve the spirit of the thing rather than us just going off and changing everything or trying to fit everything in slideshow fashion into this 2-hour thing. I can imagine a version of that. In fact, the first draft of this definitely hewed closer to that. Okay, we got to pack as much in as possible into it, and it comes out as dribble when you do that.
Yeah. So in terms of like settings, do we have Enid House and ETA? Do you do the Arizona stuff at all with Steeply and Murat, or is that stuff a little too extracurricular for the length?
We do not feature the Steeply and Murat section. There are a couple nods to it throughout, with the wheelchair squeak and
hear the squeak.
Some gloved hands putting packages on porches, and there's certainly still a little bit of a little tip of the hat to that section. But there were a couple reasons why we decided to omit that, and I think it came as a pretty mutual thing from the get-go.
Yeah, it's pretty tangential in a lot of ways, even when you're reading the book, and you're like, oh, we're back in Arizona again, and it's kind of like,
yeah,
okay.
Conceptually, I like this. Theoretically, it makes sense, but I need to be past this for a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
Part of what made it easy to cut that material is you have Wallace dealing with Steeply and Murat. That's the most conventional, in a lot of ways, thriller aspect of this text, especially if you're considering the parts that he willfully leaves out that we have to fill in later. Yeah. Emily concocted her own thriller plot. I mean, it certainly builds off what Wallace does, but it's definitely pushing it closer to her own sensibility. We didn't want those two competing with each other. It would have felt like overkill of one. This project is much like the text is. It's a very curious mix of tones. Again, that's in keeping with the spirit. That at some points it's tragic. At some points it's deeply hilarious. At some points it's like psychotic and scary.
And absurd.
And absurd, exactly. It's everything. Yeah. So we wanted to be very careful about how much of each we were getting at any given point. When Emily, when you decided, all right, I'm going to go off in this particular direction, that made cutting Steeply and Murat all the easier.
Yeah. And what he's referring to is, as he mentioned, we really broke it into Hal's world at ETA and then Gately's at Enid House. And what I did with Hal's section is really followed the traditional sort of template of what a mystery movie or TV show would be. And so in making Hal's kind of journey as this hero, a rather unconventional hero with a lot of interesting things that make him, not at all the Hollywood sort of idea of what someone you maybe want to watch is, but we were able to sort of deal with it this way, and Hal wanting to sort of solve the mystery of who killed his dad, if anyone killed his dad, but who he wants to avenge the death of his father. And that's a very
Shakespearean.
And then you also you want to root for him, and so he has all these strange things going on and is making these horrible life choices, but there's something at the end of the day, you're in it with him right from the beginning. No pun intended with the in it thing.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Nice.
Oh goodness.
Interview over.
No, let's cut that part.
So this is a screenplay. Could it be adapted to the stage, to a live situation, or is that like you need big setting?
I think you would need big setting.
Okay.
For the middle 45 minutes maybe. There it is, a lot of people in rooms talking. Yeah. I think it's dynamic, particularly in the way we've structured it, but it's still, again, it could be stage bound. The beginning, we've opened it in a way that that I'm really pleased with. Christopher Nolan once said, you have the audience at your mercy for 20 minutes, the first 20 minutes of your film. They're willing to go on whatever ride you're going to take them on. You have to eventually pay back that.
Yeah.
But for 20 minutes, you can pretty much do anything you want, and then they'll deal with it. They'll put up with it.
Right.
We borrowed from the ending of, and I'm going to forget the name.
Derivative Sport in the Tornado Alley.
Derivative Sport in Tornado Alley, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We borrowed the end sequence where Wallace imagines he's out on this empty court, and all of a sudden a tornado comes and picks him up. The more we thought about it, the more we thought, that's Hal's life right there.
Yeah,
he's playing
totally.
against himself, and then
That's
he's
great.
swept up.
Yeah.
So we begin with this visual metaphor. I mean, that alone, I'm thinking Twister. I'm thinking the end of A Serious Man, where God sends this Twister down to smite everybody.
Yeah.
Once you get to the ending in particular, though, the ending plays like Brian De Palma meets Terry Gilliam meets Quentin Tarantino. It's extremely visceral. It's disgusting. I mean, it's physically, you're mired in this murk that's both like strongly physical, but it's strongly ethereal. It's like there's gunk everywhere.
But there's something kind of beautiful about it.
I
too.
agree, yeah.
Abject beauty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and to be fair, instead of the tornado, we do use snow, which
cool.
obviously is because it's taking place on a tennis court.
Yeah,
so we'd be a
Eschaton,
little
the map
remiss to not
territory.
include the snow.
Oh,
there.
Yeah.
That's the best.
Yeah, but I mean, and then there's this camera on the tennis court recording all of this, and then I kind of don't want to spoil the ending of the scene because we're sort of building up to it, but it speaks to so many themes of the book right there in the first. I mean, I don't even know if it's a page. Maybe it is, but
Maybe.
I feel like kind of the essence of our adaptation is right there in the first page.
And I like that structurally. It's a pretty conventional move to essentially give all of the themes, give the entire arc in the first 5 minutes. But for something as dense as Infinite Jest, even in our abbreviated version, it does help the reader orient themselves. They don't realize it, I think, initially, because that image of the tornado coming down is so strange. But I do think it lingers, and I think it gives them some prism to process everything else that's happening.
That's a cool way to put it.
I
like
hope
that.
so.
Yeah. So in terms of like legalities and like hoping to actually get this made, I mean, like Michael sure has the rights to
Yes.
Infinite Jest.
Right.
So what does that look like for you guys? Like, what's the game plan?
So he hasn't done anything with it yet, as far as I can tell. There are all sorts of references on Parks and Rec where he'll bring in character names.
Totally.
But from what I gather, he hasn't really made any significant moves towards filming this.
Right.
And that he's spoken at length about it being a miniseries. Legally, for us, what does that mean? I mean, from what I gather, anybody can write a screenplay of this.
Yeah.
We haven't sold this to anybody. We don't plan on selling it. Like we're doing this right now as an intellectual exercise.
Oh yeah, cool.
I would love at some point to talk with him about it. Not, and I don't say that from I'd love for him to read it and give us all Hollywood careers.
And that'll be your big break.
And, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But rather, clearly, this is a text that means a lot to him. I think it's very telling that whether it's true or not, I do like that story that he owns the rights so that no one can make a movie of it because he sees it as this
The gatekeeper.
The gatekeeper, right.
Yeah.
So that suggests the kind of purity of intention that, whether it's true or not, I'm going to assume it is because I like Parks and Rec.
Yeah,
I would love to just talk with him about it. Have him read our draft and tell us, this is working, this isn't. I mean, as a lesson in screenwriting, as a lesson in Infinite Jest, I think that would be invaluable.
Or say, I hate 108 pages of it, but that one page somewhere in the middle has a decently cool idea. Let's talk about that.
Right.
Expand upon that.
Exactly. Let's bulldoze the whole thing and expand off that one page right there. Yeah.
Yeah, and as Josh said, this was certainly an intellectual exercise for us, and I think sort of maybe our way a little bit of just dealing with this book. Was sort of this whole idea of entertainment. And this was kind of our entertainment after putting down Infinite Jest. We didn't really know what to do, and
It's
then
a form of catharsis.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And we were able, or I guess for us, what we got out of it was sort of being able to articulate our interpretation of a little bit of this book. And like I said earlier, this was in no way us trying to put everything that makes Infinite Jest so great into one thing, but hopefully being able to communicate that to a different audience and have it live on the page has been such kind of an honor to get to be a part of that process.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great, guys. Thanks for the rundown. That's very cool.
My pleasure.
As we wrap up here, final thoughts on the conference. How was your experience at 2016 Wallace?
This was my first year presenting.
Yeah.
I have been trying to put off adulthood for quite a long time now. It makes me feel more adult, despite being in a classroom and feeling like I'm going to get tardy slip for being out in the halls to go to the bathroom. I like that feeling of being immersed with people who know so much about this thing that I care about, and feeling as though I can contribute to that in some fashion. It's exhilarating. It's the sort of thing you aspire to.
Yeah.
It's really exciting for me getting to come back for the second year and maybe being a little bit more courageous to sort of get into some of those lively discussions and know that these, everyone in the room is passionate about Wallace and something that is so close to me. And it's really cool to, last night we were sitting at dinner and I was talking to someone about this part of Infinite Jest and we couldn't remember how this like one plot fact is sort of elucidated, and we were like, do they even say it, or do we just sort of take people's word for it? And we were like, God, when does this happen? And then we just grabbed someone who's walking by and we're like, hey, do you remember this? And sure enough, because everyone in the room has read the book. So it's really cool getting to come back this year and getting to sort of reconnect with people and having those relationships. And it's just so much fun and exciting to hear all of the like ideas that are emerging from these texts and continue to emerge. Getting to hear the keynote speaker, Marshall Boswell, was so cool. And to get to hear his interpretation on something like Infinite Jest was just awesome.
It starts to feel like a reunion, like a high school reunion or some kind of like...
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, especially if this is like your second or third one and you've met these people before and you've been in touch on Twitter all year, and it's just like...
There's Mike Miley again.
It's really fantastic.
And it's so cool that one author is what binds you together with those people.
Yeah, absolutely. So good vibes all around.
Oh,
Totally.
yeah, absolutely.
Very happy.
Yeah. We'll see you back here next year.
Right.
Hopefully.
Here's hoping.
Yeah.
I mean, Princeton here is going to take the world by storm, so we got to see if that'll work.
Yeah. Well, Josh, Emily, thank you guys so much for sharing your project. It sounds really exciting, and we will definitely want to be kept up on the updates in the future. So let us know what develops.
Absolutely.
All right.
And thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Our pleasure. Thanks, guys. All right, we're here now with Tony McMahon from Melbourne, Australia. Tony, welcome to the Northern Hemisphere once again.
Dave, hi. Thanks for having me. Real pleasure. Great to be in America at the the third annual Foster Wallace Conference. I was going to say the 16th.
The 16th annual, 2016.
Yeah, the situation's good over here with Wallace Scholarship, but it's not quite that good.
Right on. So, Tony, you are... I keep referring to certain people on the show as like pillars of the Wallace community, and that's definitely the case with you. You're just every conference I've ever been to, you've been there too. So Paris last year, this year, and you indicate no signs of slowing down at all. A big factor of that, of course, being the upcoming 2017 Wallace Conference in Melbourne, Australia. Yes. So that might be a cool place you can talk about that to start off, and we can lead that into some other stuff.
First of all, thanks for calling me a pillar. That implies that I'm kind of tall and skinny, and that's definitely not the case. So thanks for that. But look, it's true. I have been going pretty hard at Wallace Scholarship for the last at least couple of years. Paris was my first Wallace conference.
Yeah, me too.
And then I came here last year, and both times I presented papers on Wallace and music. Kind of signifying rappers in Paris and more sort of punk grunge last year here at Normal. But this year I changed tack a little bit, and I spoke about adapting Infinite Jest as a television screenplay. And so that was really interesting. The paper went down pretty well, I think.
I'd say so. That was just this morning too.
Yeah, that was just this morning.
You're feeling all the euphoria of post-conference delivery relief.
I'm feeling the euphoria. I'm feeling the pain of living in a mansion in Bloomington with 4 other Wallace scholars and being up till 3 a.m. every morning arguing the finer points of whatever.
Post-structuralism and
stuff like that. So, no, it's been good. It's been great. It's been a fantastic trip.
It has, yeah. It just occurred to me that I had intended to start this interview out by saying, here's my guest, Mr. Tony McMahon.
So we could do the joke.
Because we were talking the other night about the first person who says Mr. to you, you're going to just shoot them down because you had a great
I got my doctorate, so
it's Dr.
It is
Tony
actually
McMahon.
Dr. Tony McMahon, and I am really looking forward to that first time when but no,
non-fabricated time.
Yeah, I couldn't do it to you, Dave, because you're a nice guy. It has to be somebody who's giving me shit and says, well, Mr. McMahon,
like in a condescending way.
if you don't mind, and then I'm really looking forward to saying, well, actually, excuse me, but it's Doctor. So I wouldn't have done it to you anyway. Although I probably would have tried the joke. It wouldn't have worked.
If it's artificial, it's not as funny.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So to get on to the Australia conference next year, tell us a bit about the groundwork and the plans for that.
The groundwork and plans. Those are good words. Look, I got some postcards printed up at Staples.
Oh yeah,
in
which
New York.
can I get some of those tonight? Do you have any left? They're all gone.
No, sorry.
That's
they're all gone. There should be one in your packet from the conference.
Great, I haven't looked at everything, so that's
I can easily get some more printed up, so there will be more around. Nice. So I've chosen a date, or myself and some other people who are helping me organise the conference have chosen dates, and it's September 1, 2, 3 next year, 2017, in Melbourne, Australia, probably at RMIT University, where I work and where I did my PhD. Besides that, groundwork, we're taking the kind of punk rock approach, the do-it-yourself approach.
Yeah.
Here's a chord, here's another chord, here's a third chord, go out and start a band.
And repeat.
Repeat. So it's like, here's some postcards, you go into Normal, give them out. That's the Australian David Foster Wallace Conference. This, not to suggest that it's not going to be well organised and slickly run. It will
rigorously academic and all that.
Really rigorously academic, but none of that will be coming from me. That'll be other people.
So who else is associated with this that we might know?
There's Jonathan Laskovsky, who works at RMIT. He was going to come to the David Foster Wallace Conference here last year, but couldn't come for family reasons. Nathan Seapelt, obviously, good Adelaide boy, who again was going to come and didn't make it this year.
Yeah, we just found that out the day before our Infinite Winter panel. Like, oh no, Nathan can't come, but we managed to Skype him in, so that's great.
Yeah. Look, I've had. I probably shouldn't name any names at this stage, but I've had strong expressions of interest for keynotes from two of what I consider the top three Wallace scholars in the field.
Oh, juicy details.
So you guys work out who you think that is, and and extrapolate from there. But I don't want to mention any names yet until it's kind of set in stone. But we'll have some really kick-ass keynotes. Nick Maniatis from the Howling Fantods is right behind the idea.
No kidding.
And just is kind of retweeting every tweet that I post on the kind of off chance that it's got something to do with the conference. You know when you first joined Twitter, which I did like a month ago.
Oh, that of course. Welcome to the team.
and you send that. They say, "I'll send like a test tweet out. I'm just preparing my first tweet or whatever." Nick Maniatis from the Howling Fantods actually retweeted that. So that's how keen he is about the Wallace Conference. So he'll be behind it 100%.
Oh yeah.
He's in Canberra. It's only a short drive away. It's only a really short flight away. From Melbourne.
Is it like 3 or 4 hour drives?
It's probably about 8 hour drive, which in Australia is actually not
pretty
that far.
Short. As a Canadian, I know that means short.
It's about a 50-minute flight, something like that. So he'll be all over it. I also met a ton of people here at the Wallace Conference who were really, really keen to come and also to help out. So, like I said, don't let my, kind of DIY punk rock, facade fool you. It will be kind of really slickly organised, just not by me. Because I'm not only a punk, I'm really lazy.
How about anybody from Sydney? Will they be involved? Like Lucas Thompson?
Well, I haven't spoken to Lucas for a while, and Dan Dixon, last time I spoke to him, was here last year. But I mean, I would assume so. It's not every day you get to go to Wallace Conference only an hour from where you live.
No kidding.
Especially when you live on the bottom of the planet like we do in Australia. Or as we'd like to refer to it, the arsehole of the world. So look, I can't imagine they wouldn't come, and I'll certainly be really disappointed if they didn't, if they don't come. So
emotional blackmail for you guys right here. This is like politeness roulette, but not really very polite.
No, Lucas, Dan, if you don't come, I'm never talking to you again. We're never going out to Austin, Texas and drinking beer again with Matt Booker. Thanks, Matt.
Forget about it. Yeah, Matt showed you guys a pretty good time out here in Austin.
He's like the most gracious host
I know
I've ever met. And I did say, I was kind of thinking about this Australian Wallace Conference when I was in Austin last year. And I did say to him, if he comes to Melbourne, if he makes it to Melbourne, I'll make sure I give him like the works, the whole tour. I'll like do his ironing for him. I'll like do his washing. I'll babysit his kids, whatever it takes, just to kind of pay him back for how kind he was to me when I was in Austin. It was amazing.
Yeah. Speaking of pillars of the community, Matt Booker is like there's been a palpable, we've all felt the lack of his presence at this conference. Because he's just like people. The scale of people who care about Wallace, like Matt Booker is at 11, just cranking that Spinal Tap dial.
Yeah, Rob Short's about 9.5.
Rob's very high also,
but
very impassioned.
Matt's his own, his whole own category when it comes to passion for Wallace.
And just walking encyclopedia.
Yeah, exactly. There's been so many times when someone's asked me a question or something's come up in one of those 3 a.m. conversations, and I've gone, where's Matt? He would know the answer to this because none of us do. Yeah. So getting Matt and Nick in a room, how cool would that be?
That'd be getting Matt and Nick in a room would be pretty brilliant.
I don't know.
2 guys who have just been at it since the beginning, like when Nick was on with us, I kind of felt like a really privileged fly on the wall, and they just talked about how Wallace has. In the last 20 years of their lives, which is, half their lives or like all of their adult lives.
Johnny come lately. He's been at it for, I don't know about you, but for me it's been, 5 or 6 years or something.
I read Infinite Jest in 2007, so about almost 10.
So, it's pretty different stuff.
So to go back a little bit to your presentation today, maybe unpack a little bit more what you had to say and how this sort of Q&A developed and the kinds of conversations that your paper enlivened.
Yeah, well, look, I've become really interested in adaptation studies. I teach a subject called Textual Crossings at RMIT in Melbourne where I work, and that's about adaptation theory, which is a kind of emergent field in the academy. And there's the guy who runs that course, his name is Stephen Gaunson. And he wrote something where he said that, or where he argued that adaptations are second originals, and that they're the way that stories evolve. And there's another adaptation theorist, Linda Hutchin, who says that something I'm paraphrasing here probably pretty badly, something along the lines of, to be second is not to be secondary, that adaptations are their own palimpsestic things. I've started thinking about that in terms of Wallace's work because, for obvious reasons, there's not ever going to be any more work from David Foster Wallace. So how do we as Wallace fans and as kind of Wallace scholars deal with that? And one way, I think, is to look at adaptation studies and go, well, hang on, actually there is going to be new work from David Foster Wallace. There is going to be adaptations of Infinite Jest. There's already been adaptations, albeit not very good ones, of brief interviews with hideous men.
Sorry, John Krasinski.
I love The Office. Like, I'm a huge Office fan, but you just screwed the pooch on that one. Sorry. Can I say that on the Great Conservative?
You can say it, but I'll temper that a little bit by saying that, and I've said previously that adapting that book, it seems profoundly hard because you're trying to pull all these really disparate threads together into a cohesive narrative. So I think it was a very noble enterprise to try and do
good
that.
on him for trying.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
I mean, good on him for kind of, he obviously had a fair bit of cultural cachet at the time.
Yeah.
And where did he go? He went to David Foster Wallace.
Yeah,
so,
which is like sweet, man.
Yeah,
that's
great.
great.
So good on him for
Yeah.
that. But
I just missed the bathroom attendant scene in brief interviews. You know, where it's just the onomatopoeic sound of the bathroom sounds.
Yeah.
Like that scene would have been remarkable, made in a very disgusting and abject way.
Well, I missed the lack of the female interviewer, which kind of is sort of the whole point of the book.
Yeah, the interrogation of the male psyche.
Yeah. So I think it kind of lost quite a bit by having this sort of. I don't remember it too well because it was a bit of a traumatic experience for me. But there was, if I'm not mistaken, there's like a kind of story about a young woman walking around a university campus, right, doing those interviews.
Right.
Yeah. And to me, that just really didn't work. Sorry, John. I love you, but no.
You know, redemption exists in the world and
does.
in Wallace's work. Some of us would argue, myself included.
Yeah.
How's the conference been? Just final thought, final takeaway for the conference. What's it been like to be at Wallace 2016?
Yeah, it's been really terrific. It's lovely to come back somewhere where you've obviously experienced before.
Where everybody knows your name.
Everybody knows your name. Cheers, mate. But yeah, like, so I was here last year. It was a bit different. It was at the Marriott, and it was kind of a bit classier, and it was a little bit grungier maybe this year. It was at ISU in the.
It's more DIY this year.
I reckon. Yeah. I mean, I preferred this year's probably to last year's.
Yeah.
I think last year there was possibly some more. How do I put this diplomatically? Higher caliber of the kind of upper echelons of the Wallace studies.
So Mary Kay Holland last year and Stephen Byrne.
Yeah, and David Herring. Those guys weren't here.
Yeah.
But, Marshall Boswell was, who's a superstar, obviously. So it was possibly a little bit down on that kind of things, but I really liked that it moved to the building where Wallace taught.
Yeah.
And it was at a university.
Yeah.
I just thought that really worked.
Yeah.
A little bit grungy, though it may have been.
Yeah. I just mentioned this to Josh and Emily, but Charlie Harris on the first day said to me, like, we're in this building where David's DNA is everywhere.
It is.
And that was kind of like,
there's some photos on Twitter of Chris and Rob and I looking for Wallace's DNA, and they're very embarrassing, so I should probably shut the hell up about those, really.
The photos are embarrassing, or the evidences of DNA are embarrassing?
No, there wasn't any evidence.
If we brought a black light, would there be, is that what you mean?
No, it was embarrassing for us.
Because like ultimate fanboys. Here's a thing that I have, and I think this was maybe like an anxiety of my master's supervisor team, was like, we have this guy, Dave Laird, who is obviously a huge fan of Wallace's work and wants to do something academic about it. How do we try and direct him in a way that his scholarship is not gonna be just fanish? You know, and I think for a lot of us here, that's kind of, we started out as fans and then we wanted to do something academic about it.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some scholars in the field who just do lots of contemporary American lit stuff, and Wallace is just one of the stops on that tour. So how do we separate that? Should we?
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting questions.
There is, and I think there's like most interesting questions, there's probably not any one kind of right answer.
Yeah.
But it is a really good question, and I think it's something we probably have to keep asking ourselves as Wallace scholars.
Because you want that like dispassionate objectivity in scholarship to an extent.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's also a place for like, here's how I personally connect to this material, and it's clear that people who are doing the scholarship are also having that personal response. And
absolutely, and that's what makes these conferences so great. Like, I've been at plenty of conferences since I've started my PhD, and I mean, I went to a punk conference in Leicester, and that was a hoot. It was one of the best times I've ever had away from home. But there's something about these Wallace conferences where there's that shared kind of understanding, I suppose, that we are all on some level just these rabid kind of fans.
Yeah.
That makes it so likely that we'll sit out in a backyard in Bloomington drinking beer and talk until 3 a.m. and shouting at each other.
Convexity.
Concavity. Yeah. So, and then just all be really friendly about it the next day. No hard feelings. Yeah, so look, I don't know the answer to that question, and I'd be kind of worried if I thought I did.
Yeah. That's a great way to frame that, I think. Yeah. Well, Tony, thank you so much for swinging by and
thanks, Dave.
Having a brief interview. Really appreciate your input, man.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And congrats again on your PhD.
Thanks. You're not too far away, I'm sure.
I don't know. It remains to be seen if that's a path that I take, but I think I'm pretty content for now to just hang out for a while and enjoy being done this leg of the tour. And
Wallace will get you there in the end.
If anyone does, it'll be Wallace for sure.
And it'll be this kind of
and it'll
community.
be this community, absolutely.
And one of these days, podcasts should start counting as towards academic transcripts or whatever you call them over here.
Oh yeah, that's actually been quite a big question at this conference. Is like what constitutes scholarship, and does this kind of like a extracurricular thing like a podcast constitute a scholarly enterprise, or is it part of the archive, or that's kind of been a big thing that a lot of people have been thinking about, which is cool. And I think that Chris Ayers wants to talk to me about that coming up. So
I won't steal Chris's thunder.
We might hear more about that from him. So thanks again, Tony.
Good on you, Dave.
All the best going back to the southern hemisphere.
Cheers, mate. See you soon.
All right. All right, here now with Ryan Marnane from Rhode Island.
That's right.
Ryan, welcome to the Great Concavity, man.
Thank you.
It's great to finally have you on. We've been meaning to have you as a guest or in some way, and it's great to get a chance to not only hang out and talk about Wallace in an academic way, but also to live in the same house for the last 3 days with you. And you've organized this amazing mansion Airbnb for a bunch of us. Yeah. So it's been like an extension of the conference that is so valuable. Like the kinds of conversations you have in the classrooms and the Q&A are great, but then the kinds of conversations that you have until 3 a.m. with your friends drinking beer, is a kind of different conversation, but one that is just, there's so much humanity in it and joy in it. So thanks for facilitating.
Absolutely.
It's
quite a swanky pad, isn't it?
It's very baller.
It worked out.
It's like a colonial plantation mansion, it feels like, or something. So your name has come up before on the show when we talked to Josh Royland, and you and Josh have a pretty similar interest in Wallace in that you guys are really interested in Wallace's journalistic nonfiction or creative nonfiction or
literary journalism
or any of those titles that we might apply. Yeah. So you guys are really occupying and speaking to stuff that doesn't get talked about as much as Infinite Jest or this conference. Oblivion has come up a lot,
which is great. Miley's paper was fantastic.
Yeah, Mike rocked it. Although I missed his panel, which was too bad, but other things were happening. So you gave your talk this morning. You're now in the state of cathartic, euphoric, doneness, which is always a nice feeling. Yeah. Give us an idea of what your paper was on this morning and the questions that came out of that.
Like many other papers, ignore the abstract, right?
Yeah.
So the paper was called Deepening the Archive,
the
paratextual afterlife of Wallace's literary journalism. And instead of thinking about his literary journalism in 11 different pieces, kind of exploring the varying iterations of each of them and how each piece in its different mediums modify authorial-reader relationships. So for example, Consider the Lobster was the one that I was focusing on. Mm-hmm. It's currently in 9 different places of circulation, from audiobook to e-reader to the magazine version to the book version, and the list goes on.
Yeah.
So exploring how Wallace uses those different mediums to speak to his readers by way of paratext, from the copyright page of the book version, addressing how these pieces were originally edited, to the audiobook version where he's speaking directly to the listener.
Mm-hmm. And so you played an audio clip for us of the audiobook.
How'd you think that went?
It was great. I'd actually never heard that before. Yeah. I've been listening to the Infinite Jest audiobook off and on for the last few months, but I haven't heard anything from Consider the Lobster. I mean, one reason is because audiobooks are so expensive. So if you use your one free download from Audible for Infinite Jest, which I did,
Wait, is that one credit?
That's the
it's,
well,
it's,
it's
70
one
hours.
credit. Yeah,
that's a great purchase.
So like the Serial podcast,
bang for your buck.
Totally keeps pumping Audible, and I was like, oh yeah, you get one free thing.
Right.
I could get Infinite Jest with that. Cool, and that's what I did. And then,
so what do you think of the Infinite Jest audiobook?
I've listened to probably about 6 to 8 hours of it, and I think it's quite fascinating in a lot of different ways. One of the ways which you talked about today is there's no endnotes in the original.
In the original, there isn't.
And they've since gone back and added a new file, but then you have to go back between audio files.
Right.
So there's a weird tennis match with that. That's probably harder than the book. Right. Or more work than the book in that way.
But when it was first published, I think they did the main text and then they published it with the endnotes as a PDF.
Right.
So they encourage listeners to both listen and read.
Yeah. There's the little feminine voice that comes on and says the number, like 42.
Yeah.
And then you're prompted to go.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think she's
some vaguely imperial accent.
Yeah, something like that.
I think Sean Pratt's delivery is really phenomenal.
Yeah.
I'm listening to it in my car, driving and laughing out loud all the time.
Yeah. It's not the first one either. There was an audiobook version of Infinite Jest that was done in the late 90s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
I can't get access to it.
Oh,
I know that it's been done, and
Yeah.
Sean Pratt was in contact with the individuals that did it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But Pratt's is the one that's in circulation.
Yeah, we've been in talks with Pratt to have him on soon as a guest.
Oh,
and
great.
Talk about the process with him and some of the choices. And I'm really interested in the accents.
Yeah,
the way that he portrays different characters with different accents.
Particularly
so it's a very
Canadians,
performative.
I imagine.
Canadians. Mario has a very distinct kind of soft voice. And then characters who are ethnic. Like Idrisar Salanian, for example, being from India, there's like an Indian accent associated with his character, and I'm curious to ask Sean about whose choices were these. Was this like a performative choice that you made in delivering this to make it easier for listeners to differentiate characters? Was this a choice of like the production team? What was the process behind some of those things?
And so that's what's interesting for me about moving away from Infinite Jest, like I've been trying to do for the weekend, right?
Yeah.
There are these other pieces that are really brilliant that we should be talking about. Yeah. What's particularly interesting with the texts that Wallace actually orates, like John Jeremiah Sullivan in his introduction to the audiobook DFW in his own words, says when you listen to Wallace, it's a voice that is emphatically reading, right? So like Sean was, Pratt, like you said, was acting, right? But when you listen to Wallace read, he's not acting, he's reading. It's that brain voice that Silverblatt talks about, that you get to experience as a listener. And I think it has the possibility for creating a more intimate relationship with the narrative. Not as a substitute for the book versions or the essays themselves, but as a means towards deepening possibly the intimate and immersive experience of engaging with the narrative.
Yeah. So you raised an interesting point in your talk today where you were talking about when people say, oh, I read that book, but they listened to the audiobook and they didn't actually engage with a print medium of it. You made a great claim. Like some people would be dismissive of audiobooks and say like that's not a valid form of reading. You said no, it is, but it's just it accesses a different sense.
Well, no, it's not reading
instead of visual. So it's not technically reading, but it's still a literary text.
It's still a literary experience, but it's clearly not the same experience as reading, right? I mean, you read with the eyes, you listen with the ears. But I think we shouldn't dismiss it. And especially brief interviews and of particular interest, consider The Lobster. With the literary journalism as well, because the field, the genre is about immersion. It's about consciousness on the page, and I think the audiobook lends itself towards that sensory experience of immersion. If you can do it when you're not like, taking out the trash or trying to drive to work, but if you can sit and listen to an audiobook and be present. There's something there.
But it's maybe not a substitute for actually reading.
No, of course not.
The page.
So
you're a purist.
I'm clearly there's a difference, right? But I don't assign audiobooks in my classroom. I don't think it's a substitute for engaging with the text. But I do recommend students listen and read if they have difficulties focusing. Right?
Yeah. One thing I think too about the Infinite Jest audiobook is that it's probably really hard to keep it all together, in your head if you only are listening to the whole thing for 56 hours.
Right.
Because with a book you can flip back, look at the year chronology, puzzle together, like page 223 gives us the year of subsidized time, chronology.
Imagine hitting 223 in the audiobook and then having to rewind to figure out what the hell just happened.
I feel like that's kind of a weird challenge that the book is actually gives us a form of grace in that, right? So that presents another kind of whole problem or issue with audio versus text.
Right. Mm-hmm. Again, so it's not a substitute, right? But as a means towards perhaps deepening, for me, the authority relationship.
Yeah.
But I do like Sean Pratt's.
Yeah. I think he's really talented and brilliant, and I think he's really thought a lot about this book, and probably is like one of very few humans on the planet who has read the entire book out loud.
Oh, that's interesting.
I mean,
it took him a year to do it.
A year.
Yeah, he was doing other projects in between.
Right, yeah.
But again, I haven't looked into it too much, just enough to kind of see what the discussion was regarding Wallace's audio texts. And there isn't any, right?
Yeah.
No one's engaged with sound studies in Wallace.
Yeah. So that's kind of a burgeoning field is sort of what you're saying today a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, I presented how did I open the paper? I come to you with more questions than claims.
Yeah.
Here are a few interesting points of contact with Wallace's body of work that we haven't addressed yet. I mean, we need more engagement with his nonfiction and his literary journalism in particular. But also adding to that is the audiobook.
Yeah. Cool. So you sort of left the audience with a few questions today, things to think, and not necessarily saying I have the answers to these, but here are questions going forward, and what do we make of them?
Yeah.
How do we deal with them? So what were a couple of those ideas?
So one was the influence of scholarship and archival work on how we think of published pieces from Wallace himself. So I put up the images of some of the proofs from Consider the Lobster, where the copyright disclaimer about the original organs in which these essays appeared was actually on its own page in the original proof under institutional acknowledgments. I mean, it's not on the copyright page. It's, Roman numeral 4. It's the thing that's directly next to dedicated for Bonnie Nadell. Readers would experience that institutional acknowledgement, I would imagine, much more than it being appeared on the copyright page. I don't know how many Wallace readers engage with the copyright page who aren't deep into his studies, but it changes how you engage with the essays.
Yeah.
And that the Consider the Lobster was originally supposed to be titled Host. And I don't know if your experience is like mine, but I haven't met many people who have read Host or have engaged in Host critically. But if it was the title of his second collection of nonfiction, I would imagine more people would find it important to experience and dive into that narrative because it's the title narrative of the collection.
Oh yeah. So with Supposedly Fun Thing, if it had been titled after one of the essays in the collection, how would we navigate what that collection feels like based on the title essay? Is that sort of what you mean?
Yeah.
And how does that change the dynamics of the conversation around this book or collection?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So titles frame things for us, and you gave a rad example where you had a slide of, was it 4 or 5 different titles?
Title variations of my paper.
Do you remember a couple of them?
Deepening the Archive, the paratextual afterlife of Wallace's journalism. Consider the audiobook. Brain voices. Disembodied narratives. And what was the last one? The last one had something to do with the varying iterations by way of exhibitionist value with regard to late capitalism or something ridiculous to get the audience to laugh a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of that, there was a moment where you made just awesome claim, and Corey Baldoff from the back.
Mic drop moment?
Yeah, like this sentence, boom, mic drop. And speaking of Corey Baldoff from the back goes, boom, and everyone just looks back as if someone with like Tourette's syndrome had just like interrupted this really formal thing, and I looked over and I saw it was Corey, and I just like started laughing hilariously because her passion for this subject and, you know, the way that she encourages people in this community is so unique, and just she's so passionate, and it's like you can't. Her passion for this stuff is just really the word contagious.
Yes.
Know? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so there's this really funny moment in the middle of your talk, and everyone laughed, and it just brought this. There was already great levity to the way that you were presenting things, but this. It was like this really communal moment.
Yeah.
That was really beautiful.
Yeah, we need more of that at these conferences, right?
Yeah. Because it does feel a bit stuffy sometimes when you're reading, like, you know, for 20 minutes in a row off your page, and there's no interaction with the audience except for you look up once in a while.
Well, I try to. I think that's important. I mean, you're in this space. So I talked about like ecology and the environmental component to how I think about literature, right? I mean, the narratives exist on a landscape, and those landscapes inform where we read, whether it's a magazine or a book or an e-reader or an audiobook, right? So where you engage with a particular narrative in the context and the medium in which it's presented informs physically your physical environment in which you read. Many people experience the audiobook when they're doing other things, right? Making it a passive reception of a narrative rather than the active engagement with a text. But can you invert that and make the audiobook experience particularly more active by finding an environment where you can immerse yourself in the narrative that's in your ears? But yeah, we need more Corys out there. She's awesome, and her presentation was fantastic. And she's running around the house right now with her
big optimism filter, taking pictures of people. Yeah,
absolutely.
We got a good family
street out there. Blocking traffic.
Yeah, totally. So Ryan, where can people find some of your work? What's your Twitter? You know, where do you live online? For people
online, where do I live? I don't know. I'm on Twitter. That's a place to
Is it just your name?
Ryan Marnane. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
The internet.
The
internet, that thing.
Which is a really interesting topic, you know, in Wallace studies now, almost 10 years later after Wallace's death, and the way that social media has developed since then, and the way it's employed in things like politics and social discourse. Trump has come up a lot at this conference in respect to Johnny Gentle.
Yeah, of course.
And I mean, social media has a huge role to play in that conversation.
But it has a significant role to play in Wallace studies as well.
Yeah, because Wallace anticipates a lot of this stuff.
But it's also just a fantastic way to stay connected with people, and to share ideas and to exchange perspectives.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the cutoff point.
Any final thoughts on the conference? How's your experience been overall here at Wallace 2016?
It's good community.
It is. That's the word that keeps coming up with all these interviews. Is that, like, you know, the academic stuff is great and it's fun to talk about this stuff, but it's probably more fun to talk about this stuff, you know, at the restaurant or the pub after, and that's where you can really get, you know.
Yeah, if you really want to know what an academic thinks, hold your questions from the Q&A and bring them to the bar.
Yeah.
For example.
That's really sound advice.
Yeah, there you go. Take that with you.
Well, Ryan, thanks so much for taking the time to talk about your paper and about your experience here, and we look forward to your future work on Wallace and in a unique and burgeoning field that not a lot has been really done on yet. So keep it up. And you're almost done the PhD process? You're getting close to wrapping?
I hope to be wrapping up this semester.
Cool.
That would require quite the legwork in the month of August. But
so Dr. Marnane is on the horizon?
Yeah, if not December, then 100% in May. So.
Cool. Yeah. So the next time we talk to you, you will no longer be a mister, you'll be a doctor.
That's the plan.
Right on. Cheers, man. Congratulations.
And congratulations on your master's.
Hey, thanks.
That's fucking awesome.
It's funny, like coming into a room of, you know, this magnitude, having just finished a master's feels like, oh, way to go, little Dave. Like, we all have PhDs. No. You know, like, so I have a certain there's a certain humility or like self-consciousness or paranoia that comes with that.
The imposter syndrome is alive and well at these conferences, right?
Yeah.
But I've met too many tenured track, well-published scholars who I just fundamentally disagree with, their approach to a particular idea. So for me, the title means very little. It's about the ideas.
Of course, yeah. It's just like a social construct that, signifies something in some ways, but in other ways it's really irrelevant.
Yeah.
To our basic humanity and ability to engage.
Right. Yeah. Dismantle the social constructs of, academic positions.
Which is a really like imperial Darwinian enterprise in a lot of ways.
Hey man, I'm trying to promote disciplinary disobedience right now, right? We need more interdisciplinary dialogue with Wallace studies.
Totally.
And that's why some of the papers were really fantastic, just from film theory and performance studies, and adaptation. There was some really cool
gender studies.
Yeah, that's important. I'm waiting for the feminist reading of brief interviews to come out.
Is that a publication that's on the horizon? Like a publication?
I'm sure someone's got a fire burning in them. That
Like probably it's in the hopper for someone else.
Isn't Mary Holland working on that?
I think I've heard rumors of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And certainly at Paris, she kind of gave an invocation in her final address that like this is an area that the majority of scholars haven't really paid much attention to, and maybe because most of the scholars are males. But this needs to be really addressed because there's some big problems here.
Right.
Yeah.
And the journalism.
And the
audiobook.
And so like new burgeoning fields are blooming, which is a really exciting thing.
Yeah. Well, cheers for disseminating these new ideas out into the world.
It's our pleasure.
Awesome.
Thanks, Ryan. And we're back with probably the last of the brief interviews here, and we have some familiar faces. Rob Short, who you've recognized from a pretty recent past episode, and Chris Ayers. So welcome back, guys, to the Great Concavity.
Nice to be back.
Thanks for having us back.
Oh yeah, it's a great pleasure. Tell us, guys, a little bit about how your experience this weekend, what you talked about, what were some highlights, what are some interesting questions that emerged throughout the conference. I know, Chris, you got one issue you want to talk about.
I wouldn't call it an issue. I'd call it a talking point.
I
don't have a personal issue.
There's not like an axe to grind, but there's just
I would say it was
an interesting thought.
I would say it was my main takeaway from the conference, not being an academic, being sort of the fish out of water type. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah. Okay, so the question was raised about how is doing a paratextual or extracurricular thing like a podcast, should we consider that to be a form of like valid academic engagement? And I told a brief story, I think, and Rob and I can relate on this, is that we're both trying to finish these long academic projects. His is a dissertation, mine was a thesis. And yet, like, I have these deadlines for my master's over the last year, and I'm just consistently not handing my chapters in because I got busy with life and other things. And but meanwhile, I was still maintaining the podcast with some consistency, and one of my supervisors kind of jokingly in an email at one point when I was super late with the submission said, maybe a little bit less podcasting and more writing of your thesis, so we can get you done here and moved on would be great. And I was like, oh, shoot, yeah. I mean, he's got a great point.
Yeah, because you were 3 months late.
Oh, yeah, at least. Like, I botched a lot of deadlines. They were like soft deadlines, so I was like, but if I'm given a hard deadline, I'll finish stuff. But if it's soft, like, I just can't.
Same way.
Well, I can. My wife and I argue about this a lot. She's like, no, you can do these things. You just willingly choose not to. So that's a funny conversation that recurs a lot. But that raises the question of, like, is doing this podcast thing like an invalid form of scholarship, or is it less important than doing academic writing? And so you wanted to kind of raise that question.
Well, this actually came up during the Infinite Winter panel where you guys, like, have 5 or 6 of you put in an intense amount of work over 3 months to guide hundreds of people through this book. And you're basically working in the same realm as your thesis or dissertation, but it's seen as extracurricular and therefore not important. And I think I've really never considered that, because I'm not the kind of person who learns well in an institution. I learn through extracurricular by like listening to podcasts or searching stuff out.
Right.
I'm not an academic. So you're reaching me, who have no bearing on your academic career success, right?
Right.
Outside of the safety bubble of academia.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm just kind of curious, like, is there a perceived value or lesser value in reaching the general, the unwashed masses, civilians, so to speak, rather than the
fuliginists,
right? Rather than academia. I mean, I think there's a huge value, and a couple people brought up impact. Like, what is the impact of your work? You can actually measure the impact of your work by how many people downloaded your podcast, or get an idea of how many people participated in the reading group.
Yeah.
And that's something that's maybe harder to measure sometimes in academia unless you get the personal one-on-one contact or feedback. So I think it's a huge, there's got to be some kind of a shift in like what is appropriate, or like what is valued in academia.
What counts?
What counts, exactly. Yeah. I mean, podcasting is a very newer format, so and with something I put
cutting edge.
I put a lot of
we're
value.
Cutting edge. We're sitting on a hardwood floor in like an empty room here with the thing on a stand. It's a pretty janky rig.
But the fact that anyone can do it doesn't necessarily discount it, right? There's brilliant people making podcasts that I listen to every week. I mean, I listen to probably on a given week like 20 hours of podcasts.
Wow.
I'm not kidding.
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah.
I have a problem.
I'd say I'm about like 3 to 4 hours a week on podcasts, maybe a bit less.
I only listen to the Great Academy.
Yes, we've monopolized Rob Short's podcast interest. That's great. But yeah, so that
and
that's
only my episode, though.
Oh yeah, on repeat. Yeah. So narcissism being a consistent theme, in a lot of papers this weekend. Sweet. So that is an interesting thought and question. And
also, you've got an archive of information in the Infinite Winter group. Stuff that's just going to be there that people can go back and look at.
Yeah.
It doesn't disappear when you're done with it. It's it's still valid as anything, I think.
Yeah. My sister and my mom recently started reading Infinite Jest, like maybe in the last 2 or 3 weeks, because they kind of wanted to understand my thesis, and they both came to my defense in the literal sense of like they physically showed up to the room where I gave my thesis defense. So one thing that I did is I was like, this might help you a little bit. Here's the link to all the posts I did for Infinite Winter, and after you read the first 75 pages, you can read the first one, and then after 150, you can read the second one, and maybe that will help them connect some ideas together. So even way after the fact, possibly it could still help guide people in a way.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. I'm probably going to put my foot in my mouth, like, for job prospect wise, but I think one of the reasons why, there's the obvious devaluation of work like this by older guard academics who, it's like the only thing that's left of tradition, like old, long-standing educational academic traditions, and like passing of torches and things like that. These vaunted ideas that really exist just in form only or in name only anymore. But there's still absolutely, like, the one thing that they've still got is this gatekeeper of like graduate and doctoral sort of education, and then the publishing business that goes along with that with the university press system. But that's not even that is something that they have sole control over anymore, because you've got academic imprints of different publishing companies that are not associated with universities anymore. It's just economics, I think, at the end of the day. Like, it's just simple math. Like, every person who does something out of love or out of just wanting to put an author's work in front of as many people as they can, and does it for free, they see it as a zero-sum game, right? So, like, that was research that they could have done and published and charged for, or at least they could have done and published and then put in a tenure packet, or used to fill a certain research quota, or a certain sort of publishing quota, turn it into an article or whatever. But it's not a zero-sum game, especially when you're working on something that's not quite canonical yet.
Yeah.
We don't. There's no, like, you have a Shakespearean, but you don't have a Wallace, a tenured Wallace track like that. or a Wallace line in your department that you need to keep staffed. So even with contemporary American stuff, you don't see Wallace taught a lot at the college level. I'm sure you see it more and more now.
Yeah.
I've taught a class on it, and a couple other people I know have taught classes on it. But it's not like you're going to go to every bookstore, university bookstore in America and find copies of Wallace's books like you would like the Norton Shakespeare, or I don't know. Yeah. But it's that, and it's envy, I think, as well, because this stuff is cool. And find like trying to squirrel away some tiny little angle about Hamlet that hasn't been written yet is an increasingly hard, and I'm sure incredibly frustrating and non-fulfilling sort of thing to do for a living. Because that talk about a zero-sum game, like try writing something new about Hamlet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that we have the luxury in Wallace Studies of like, this is a fairly new academic field of research, and even like we're seeing a huge explosion of it since especially 2008. But I mean, still,
it's not like I'm panicking because I think it's all going to be done.
Exactly, like there's still a lot of ground and territory.
No, it's not even started yet. So.
Yeah. So speaking of territory, Chris, you have brought some of your wares to the conference, some of your poster work to sell, and so maybe you could talk about what's the response from the people this weekend been to your work, and actually seeing it like not just on your blog or somewhere on Twitter or something, but physical copies of your stuff here that they can take home with them. What's been the experience with that?
It's been really positive. Everyone's been really great about it. And, I presented this stuff up on a big screen last year. People have seen it on their computer monitors. Yeah. I didn't do a presentation this year. I didn't really want the stress and anxiety of worrying about that.
Maybe Rob could speak to that in a minute. The stress of conference presentation.
So, yeah, it's been a relatively relaxed for me conference, except for the fact that I'm sitting in classrooms, which is not my natural habitat, which maybe for you guys is. It just brings up more anxiety and worry. It's like every bad dream I ever had is like sitting in one of those college classrooms. Yeah. I got my bachelor's and I was done. I didn't look back. Yeah. Anyway, that's a aside. So the setting is a strange thing for me to be in, actually. I'm like adjacent to a lot of academics, but it's not my everyday thing. And that's most of the people who attend the conference. And I'm like one of the few creative people who's not representing a university or, working on some kind of academic pursuit. Everything I did was for fun. And there's a lot of passion and energy put into that, and it's good to see the response to that, because I think I talked about it in my previous episode. When I first put this stuff out there, I had fear of being called a fraud. I wasn't aware of this community. I wasn't aware of online reading groups. I was like, someone will see this and say, well, that's not right. That's not what he meant.
Well, you picked the right author, I think, to do this.
Yeah. It became clear to me that there was something there worth exploring. About 2/3 of the way through the book, I hadn't even finished the book when I started creating artwork, based on it. Wow! And I was afraid I would actually encounter something at the end of the book that would nullify something I understood at the beginning, too. So there's a lot.
It's not a great book. The end.
But yeah, it's something, a little factoid or something, because I was trying to be as detailed as possible in the research of the artwork. But anyway, the response has been great, and I was just basically in and out, trying to set my table up where people were going to be, and even people who didn't buy anything or just kind of have a smile on their face, that there's something that's not strictly an academic paper. I'm like, there's color and tactile quality to this stuff. And
totally, you don't get that shit at MLA.
Oh, burn.
So anyway.
It's like the phenomenon of listening to music on iTunes and Apple Music and whatever versus like the phenomenon, like the resurgence in vinyl that we've seen in the last decade or so, that like you can go buy this huge physical album that you can hold the art in your hand, and it's like there's something immensely satisfying about that, and having like the physical copy of your work here that people can take home has a similar kind of property, I think.
It was just nice being able to see so many pieces without having to like click a right arrow or a left arrow.
It's just all there, and you have to scan.
Yeah,
it's all laid out on the table.
It was funny. I hadn't even printed my stuff out for myself. It had always been digital.
Really? Hey?
Like I ordered a T-shirt or something that I made just to see the quality of the T-shirt printing. But like it was interesting for me as an experience to see. Yeah. I'm primarily a digital artist. I work in TV, and it's like sort of ephemeral. It's it's on the screen for a second and then gone. And rarely anything I make like sticks around as a print piece anymore. So yeah, that's a really cool experience.
That's great. Very cool. And Rob, you gave a paper this morning.
I did.
It was, I would say thematically, it was fairly similar to some of the stuff we talked about on your episode.
Yeah, I'm a one-trick pony.
With Wallace no, not that, but like that was not very long ago that we did that episode, right? And so this, like, you were working on this stuff when we talked, and now it's been kind of realized in an academic forum, I guess you could say. Yeah. So give us like the brief overview of how, like, what you talked about today and the kinds of questions that came up in the Q&A. And
this was an excerpt from my second chapter about the internovel period and looking at the Wallace's criticism that he published between when he published Broom of the System and when he published Infinite Jest. A lot of people use Wallace's answers to questions in interviews to legitimize or shore up their own arguments about what they want to say about Wallace's work. And they point to his interview answers as like, see, this is what I was saying. He says himself that
this is the decoder ring for interpreting the fiction.
Right. And it's, I think, interviews they're a little problematic. I mean, they can be a lot problematic if somebody's, has a history of being purposefully misleading, and throwing you off the scent with their interviews. Yeah. But generally when somebody's consistent on a point over and over and over, across a span of many, many years, and he gets asked a question and he gives the same sort of answer, or he modifies that answer and tells you why, it's generally accepted that it's not a very elaborate ruse, but it's still, somebody could take you to task for relying solely on that for evidence for your argument if they wanted to. Yeah. But I decided to try to get around that, or to hedge a little bit, hedge my bets in terms of getting called out for that kind of error by looking at what he says about other people's fiction. Yeah. Because he published some book reviews in that internovel period that don't really get talked about a lot. Published some criticism of other critical, like, monographs by this guy named H.L. Hicks, and then he reviews Kathy Acker's Portrait of an Eye, which if you haven't read that, it's a laugh riot.
Oh, okay.
No, he just absolutely burns it down. It's brutal.
Yeah.
But so I look in there for across the span of time between those two novels for what it is that he praises and what it is that he sort of pans about theoretical works. Yeah. Because the arc of my dissertation is a sort of theory recovery arc in this middle period in between the theory heavy novel and then the sort of subverting theory to narrative concerns, more traditional narrative concerns. I wanted to see if you could find evidence of this evolution of his thought about theory in what he says about other people's work, and if it changes from time to time, and it does. He's on record, like in '87, right after he publishes Broom, defending critical theory, defending like high-flown sort of jargony post-structural criticism in the New York Times, in an op-ed in the New York Times, and then publishes stuff in the Harvard Book Review. It's pretty soon after that, less than 2 years, before you can see him kind of turning 180 around. He's decided that he didn't, he's changed his mind. He's changed the reason
reason for writing.
For writing fiction, the goal of the fiction.
Yeah.
Anyhow, and I don't know, the questions that we got in the Q&A, really what I remember most about the Q&A is McLaughlin, who was involved with the Review of Contemporary Fiction, which is where Wallace published that essay on Wittgenstein's Mistress that I talked about half my presentation for.
The Empty Plenum?
Yeah. Is sitting 3 feet in front of me while I'm making all these claims about Wallace and theory of recovery. And, he was there at ISU when Charlie Harris was, and when ISU was like a magnet for grad students who wanted to write experimental fiction, theory of fiction. And I'm like, Wallace hated and I'm just afraid I'm coming off like super reductive, or I'm just really I'm putting my foot further and further down my throat, in front of this guy.
Yeah.
But I talked to him afterward, and he was really nice.
Yeah, he's
really
great.
Nice
So there's like a certain phobic, paratext to being a scholar and like presenting at a panel in front of these like people who personally knew Wallace and have tenured positions and who've written a lot, and like there's an anxiety factor here that is worth talking about, maybe. So I mean, and that's something that Wallace is really interested in his work is human anxiety, and we see that in The Pale King and everywhere.
I sweat like to make him proud.
Yeah, exactly. No bandana today for you though. At least tied around your forehead, but like maybe in other ways we saw bandanas show up.
Well, everybody that I met over the course of this conference was who knew Wallace and who made themselves available and brought out stuff like physical, like almost like they were like sacred objects.
That term kept being used during
like you were going to touch the Shroud of Turin or something.
There were some great objects though, really cool,
really
obscure stuff. Yeah,
and he just it's not like he's got them in archive quality bags and
no, like everyone got to touch it.
Yeah, he was just like, here you go.
Like,
here's a letter from Wallace.
Syllabus. Yeah, totally. Yeah, there was some really beautiful stuff that came out in that panel yesterday, I thought.
I think my favorite thing that I learned in that was that Wallace made the guy from Publishers Weekly, I think it was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when Publishers Weekly sent somebody to Normal to interview him, he was like, "Where should I? I'll pick up lunch. Where should we go?" And he's like, "I'll meet you at the deli or the lunch counter at Kmart."
Yeah,
and made that guy eat at Kmart.
Yeah, like the high-low distinction is really funny there. Like, I'm going there to talk to this high literary guy, David Foster Wallace, and we're gonna just eat at like the most dumpstery place
Blue Light
imaginable.
Special. Yeah.
And Charlie said that Dave liked to eat there a lot. Like he wanted just normal people around him, and he sought out normal people as friends here, and that was kind of his MO.
Yeah. And that everybody normal is normal people.
Yeah, it's just
sorry, that was a bad joke.
Well, I mean, we've all made that joke at some point at
it's
a conference.
It's a lovely town, though.
Yeah, it's great. Totally. Yeah. Cicadas everywhere. Cicadas.
Cicada.
Potato. I say cicada.
Cicada. Depends if you're Canadian or American. Long versus sharp A's, right? Yeah. Pasta. Drama. Yeah.
We'll check that later.
Any final thoughts on the conference, guys? Final reflections or really, key takeaways, impressions?
Since I went to the conference last year and we were in the Marriott, there's a whole different vibe to being in like a sort of professional, commercial environment versus being in the university.
Yeah.
I guess I had the anxiety of like going into a couple panels late and there's like the squeaky door.
I'm bringing a can of WD-40
They really
next year.
Like some oil on those hinges would have been a really substantial grace this weekend.
I brought that up at the end of the suggestions for next year. Yeah. That was my only really criticism. If I come in late, I don't want the whole room to look at me.
Yeah.
It's rude to come in late, but I was actually manning my table selling some artwork.
People do that in every panel I've ever been in.
Yeah.
You just kind of have to expect it. But yeah,
hearing the squeak takes on as kind of a new resonance.
This rodential son of a bitch right here.
How about for you, Rob? Final takeaway.
I just want, if anybody that was here, who, like, I overheard a couple of times people saying like, oh, this wasn't as good as this particular part or aspect of the conference wasn't as good as last year. It was a little different in this way or that way. Really kind of got put into perspective at the end when we were sort of debriefed by the organizer on the funding for this conference, which did you guys know that before? So the funding, ISU cut every bit of funding that they have given in previous years to support this conference and make it happen. Food budgets,
venue budgets. Just, I mean, it's the amount of places to bleed money when you put on an academic conference has got to be pretty limitless. You just get nickel and dime to death. Yeah. And so this year it had a little bit more of a DIY kind of feel to it. Yeah. And, there were maybe some things that were a little rough around the edges, but not that affected the quality of the work. Yeah. Or the feel of the community. No, absolutely not. If anything, that felt kind of ratcheted up. Yeah. Yeah. And when he told us that they cut every bit of funding to this and that we were completely self-funded, every bit of money that got spent on this conference came from the registration fees of the attendance of the conference. Volunteer labor. And the huge, thankless bunch of folks, students and volunteers in that English department and probably beyond who were patient and, never, didn't want to thank you. We're just happy to help you out. And it made me kind of proud that when he said that, it recast the whole thing in my head. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? Good. Like, we don't need their money. We'll do it ourselves. But that made me proud of this community. Yeah. It made me proud of ISU. Yeah. And it really it recast the whole experience of the conference. Yeah. And so thank you again to everybody who helped out behind the scenes, who set up tables or who directed people to panel rooms. I think a really beautiful representation of what you're saying was that yesterday the person who got to introduce Marshall Boswell was Zeph, who was like the head student volunteer coordinator, second year undergrad student. And he got up and he was like, I'm a second year undergrad student and I am really into this stuff. And now I get to introduce one of the earliest Wallace scholars, Marshall Boswell. And guy did foundational work. Yeah. And he was just so amped and excited to be there. And he did such a rad job introducing it. And I was like, he was nervous for about 10 seconds. Yeah. And then that young man just lit it up. Handled business. I was so proud. Hats off, young man. Yeah. So Zeph and your team, thank you guys so much for all your work. And I talked to Jane Carman earlier today in an interview and talked about her experience running this conference over the last few years. And absolute thanks to all of them for everything this year. It's been great.
I have a suggestion. Maybe we start a pledge drive section on the Great Concavity.
People like a Patreon or something?
Yeah, Patreon. There you go. It's a fun next year's conference.
All right, Rob, thank you so much for swinging by. Chris, thank you for your inputs. Love getting to catch up with recurring guests. So fun to see familiar faces, both in real life here at the conference and, again on the show. So thank you guys again for what you're doing in the community and keep it up.
Yeah. Thanks.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Fun.
That's what a podcast is.
Cut that part out.
Hello, Dave and Matt. This is Chris Ayers. Dave, you and I were talking about the nature of Easter eggs in media after the David Foster Wallace conference, and I wanted to add my own audio Easter egg to your podcast, so to speak, if you don't mind. This also serves as a confession. At the end of the conference, there were about, I don't know, maybe half the attendees still there after the very final panel, and did a drawing. It was a raffle for some of the items that were left over from the conference, t-shirts, books, and that kind of stuff. I didn't put my name into the drawing because I already had most of that swag. Jane Carman had been kind enough to give me some of that stuff for helping out designing the conference logo and manning the book table while she was away. So I did not put my own name into the drawing where you could write your name on these cards. I actually went for sort of a lowbrow joke. I wrote down Hugh G. Erection on the cards. Hugh is, of course, the porn actor in James Owen Condens's film Mobius Strips, and I was pretty certain most people in that room would get the joke. Unfortunately, the guy drawing the names and the conference organizer had not read Infinite Jest, so it might have seemed like I was trolling him. So I apologized to Ryan Edel if that seemed like the case. He did draw the name and blushed, I think, and then said, Hugh? Is there a Hugh here? So I felt kind of bad after that point that he did not get the joke. And had he read the book, probably would have realized that a lowbrow joke in this setting would have been something that David Foster Wallace would have appreciated. So anyway, I just wanted to add that. I think that's the very definition of an Easter egg, something that only a few amount of people will get the joke. But all right, thanks. Really enjoyed talking with you guys at the conference, and hope to see you soon.